Closing arguments began today in the trial of a Navy SEAL accused of murder. 40-year-old Special Operations Chief Edward Gallagher allegedly stabbed an ISIS prisoner to death and posed for photos with the corpse. Prosecutors also say he shot at non-combatants. Gallagher has pleaded not guilty to all charges, and if convicted of murder, he could face life in prison. CBS News national security correspondent David Martin joins us now from the Pentagon. David, you followed every twist and turn of this case. Just remind us what the main issues have been as this trial has unfolded.
This goes back to the fighting for Mosul, the second largest city in Iraq, in February of 2017, in which U.S. troops were backing up Iraqi forces trying to take the city back from ISIS. And one of the U.S. units that was involved in the fighting was a platoon of Navy SEALs commanded by Chief Gallagher. And during the fighting, he is alleged to have bent over a wounded ISIS fighter who had been hit in an airstrike, and he allegedly stabbed the ISIS fighter in the neck and killed him, which is the principal charge against him. He then is alleged to have posed with the corpse for a photo, and he is, as you said, he's also been accused of taking pot shots at civilians. And once the members of his platoon reported him for these alleged war crimes, he is also now alleged to have threatened them if they turned him in. So one of the other charges against him is obstruction of justice. But this has been a wild trial, and it's hard to see where this is going. It's a case which President Trump has taken a personal interest in early on. Before the trial began, he ordered Chief Gallagher released from the brig where he was being held pending trial and allowed to live in a barracks, and that's since been loosened too. He's living at home with his family. And the prosecution has been charged with misconduct for allegedly trying to track down leaks by putting email trackers on some of the lawyers' emails accounts. And then most dramatically, one of the witnesses reversed the story he had told investigators and claimed in court that it was he, not Chief Gallagher, who had killed this young ISIS fighter by putting his thumb over the trachea hole in his throat to, in essence, suffocate him. And the reason he said he did that was because he was afraid that the Iraqis would torture him once they got their hands on him. So he portrayed it as a mercy killing. And when he was asked, well, why are you only telling us this story now? He said, well, because Chief Gallagher has a family and he doesn't deserve to spend the rest of his life in prison. Now, President Trump looked at the possibility of pardoning Chief Gallagher before the trial began. He did not do that, but certainly that does not rule out the possibility that he could issue a pardon after the trial is completed, a verdict is rendered, and a sentence handed out.
All right, David Martin, skillfully walking us through the many interesting aspects of this stunning case. Thank you so much. We now have attorney Deborah Blum here with us to talk about what's at stake and what could possibly happen next. So I appreciate you coming here to speak with us about this. But as David just outlined, I mean, this is unheard of, this type of case and the twists and turns that we've seen with someone else jumping in and saying, hey, it was me. One of the main issues here is that there is no known autopsy for this ISIS fighter who was killed, and a lot of what's being discussed here is based on testimony, witness testimony. How challenging is that, and what kind of case does it make when there's a real lack of tangible evidence to look at and determine what happened?
Well, the prosecution here has to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt, which is dictated by the federal code. And based on all of the doubt that has come out during this trial, it is unlikely that they are going to get a conviction. We have heard from numerous individuals that there's no direct proof. For example, he's charged with shooting at civilians. That's a heinous thing, but no one came in and testified and said, I saw Eddie Gallagher pull the trigger. And in terms of the shooting, the forensic pathologist, the forensic pathologist said that there's no stab wounds that he observed when conducting his investigation.
And what about the SEAL medic who testified and said he saw Gallagher stab the prisoner, but this medic was the one who suffocated the individual to death afterwards? How much does that muddy the waters for a clear conviction, which you don't expect?
Well, it's going to be up to the jury if they believe and take his testimony at face value. It is strange for somebody to have been prepared by the prosecution and then to go in and testify completely differently. So this was a complete shock to the prosecution that they had this witness say that he was the one that committed the murder.
And doesn't that witness risk perjury charges if you get up and say something you know isn't true?
Yeah, you know, there's a brotherhood amongst these Navy SEALs, and I think that that's what's coming out here is, you know, for example, with taking photographs of the corpse, that's a common thing that unfortunately does happen when we send our troops to go and protect our country. They often do take photographs. So there's a culture here, and I think we're seeing a lot of that come to play.
And you can't forget what people sometimes describe as the fog of war. I mean, this battle for Mosul in February of 2017, it was long, it was ongoing, and it wasn't a kind of guaranteed thing that this would work out for the U.S. forces there. There's another piece of evidence, though, that the prosecutors are pointing to, and that's a group text chat where one SEAL wrote to his colleagues, and we have it here, we can pull it up, quote, "I shot more warning shots to save civilians from Eddie than I ever did at ISIS. I see an issue with that." This is Gallagher, of course, accused of shooting at non-combatants. How problematic is this text exchange for him?
Well, you know, the prosecution does have some things here, such as that text exchange, but then we had an Iraqi general that testified that when he turned over the body, he was with the body. The young man, the ISIS fighter, was still alive, and that he didn't see Eddie Gallagher stab him. And then you also had a sergeant testify and said that when the body was moved to take the corpse photo, that he also didn't witness any stab wounds. So I think that the defense can overcome what the prosecution proffered during the trial.
All right. Well, we appreciate you walking us through what's a tough case to I guess, complete and win here for the prosecution, but we'll keep a close eye on it. Deborah Blum, thank you.
Thank you.